Number 10. Narrow escape from volcano. In 2019, someone trying to get a better view into Hawaii's Kilauea volcano had an extremely close brush with death when he accidentally tumbled inside. This guy was a 32-year-old soldier, and apparently he leaned so far into the volcanic crater that he tripped and stumbled into it, falling over 70 feet or 21 meters into the smoking hole of death. According to a spokesman with the park, the man foolishly climbed over the metal railing, and that was when the disaster struck. CBS News said that the man refused to release his name, which isn't that surprising considering he was probably super embarrassed. He had been taking part in military training exercises on the Big Island when he unintentionally fell into the volcano. But even though this guy may sound extremely unlucky for what happened, it could have been much worse. He actually should have fallen 300 feet or 91 meters to the very bottom of the crater, at which point he probably would have died. But he was extremely lucky to land on a narrow ledge only 70 feet, 21 meters, down. This enabled rescuers from the park to rappel down, hook the man up to a stretcher, and then airlift him to the Hilo Medical Center. He was definitely injured, but after just a couple of days, he was reported as being in stable condition. Number 9. Tsunami survivor. A tsunami survivor was rescued after spending a miserable 15 days drifting aimlessly in the Indian Ocean. This guy turned out to be one of the luckiest men on Earth, after surviving on nothing but coconuts that he had found floating in the water by ripping them open with his teeth. This all went down about 15 years ago, after a devastating earthquake rocked Indonesia and Malaysia. 21-year-old Ari Afrizal was docked at Port Klang near the capital city of Kuala Lumpur when the giant tsunami wave came bearing down on the city. The waves slammed down on those still on the docks. Ari and his friends were literally swept out of their boat and dragged into the sea, and before he knew what was happening, the land had vanished and Ari was floating in the middle of nowhere on a small plank of wood only about 5 feet or 1.5 meters long. In an interview with the Associated Press, Ari said that he stayed floating for 5 days before spotting a small raft with a hut on it. Inside that hut, he found a gallon of water. It was the luckiest thing that could have possibly happened to him, besides getting rescued, of course. Then, 10 days later, a container ship sailed right past Ari and his little raft. The captain just so happened to spot the frail man waving his t-shirt and screaming, and Ari was saved. All of Ari's stars really lined up, otherwise he would have surely perished and been sleeping with the fishes. Number 8. Metal beam of death. A man in San Jose walked away with only a small scratch on his arm after an enormous steel beam crashed directly through his windshield and nearly splattered the man's torso. According to the San Jose Fire Department, this unidentified man was driving southbound on Highway 280 when the truck in front of him experienced some difficulties. The metal loader tray, which is basically just a huge metal beam of death, somehow disconnected and flew off the back of the truck, bounced off the pavement like a ricocheting tennis ball, then impaled the windshield of this unfortunate guy's car. But it really was one of the closest scraps with death a person can have. The metal beam literally smashed through the center of his windshield, missing the man's body by mere inches. Hopefully this guy understands just how lucky he is to be alive and volunteer at a soup kitchen or something. Have you ever had anything scary happen to you on the highway? Or any close call? What did you do? Let us know in the comments section below. Hey, real quick, if you're new to the channel, welcome. Don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already. Number 7. The wrong injection. Sometimes people are saved from their own stupidity by sheer dumb luck. Yet again, another unidentified man had a close scrape with death when he injected himself with a rather strange concoction made in his own home. The guy got a hold of some magic mushrooms, brewed a tea, and then thought it would be a good idea to inject the magic mushroom tea directly into his veins. This case was so bizarre that it was even published in the Journal of Academy of Consultation Liaison Psychiatry, since the man thought that injecting himself with the magic mushroom concoction would cure his bipolar disorder. Of course, it didn't cure anything. The man was rushed to his local hospital after he was discovered an unspecified amount of time later in an extremely disoriented state. Emergency medical professionals at the hospital found that several of his organs were failing. Apparently, the injections of the mushroom tea had caused a type of fungus to begin growing inside of his veins, and this did some serious damage to almost every part of his body. This guy was basically turning himself into a mushroom. Doctors needed to treat his damaged organs, he was forced to take antibiotics, and he even needed antifungal medicine to kill the infection inside of his veins. The trip to the hospital wasn't exactly the trip the guy was looking for. And as a word to the wise, the doctor who treated this extremely lucky man suggested that the public really needs to be properly informed about the dangers of these types of substances. If this guy hadn't been taken to the hospital in time, his self-administered injection would have been the death of him. Number 6. The deadly dog lick. An elderly woman in Britain recently escaped with her life after nearly dying because a dog licked her face. She was not only extremely unlucky that the dog's tongue almost killed her, but she was also very lucky that she had been on the phone with a relative when she began to slur her speech and grow unresponsive. The relative immediately became concerned and got a hold of the paramedics, who subsequently found the old woman unconscious and unresponsive in her home. If it hadn't been for that family phone call, she would have very likely died sitting alone in her chair. But by now, you're probably wondering how exactly the woman was nearly killed by a dog's tongue? What happened was that bacteria found inside the mouths of both dogs and cats must have somehow gotten transferred into her bloodstream when her dog licked her face. The bacteria caused a sepsis infection, which, according to the chief of infectious diseases at North Shore University Hospital, is something that can have deadly effects on those who are already immunocompromised. Sepsis caused the woman to experience confusion, headaches, diarrhea, fever, and a shutdown of her kidneys. Sepsis poisons your blood and causes your organs to fail, and that's exactly what happened in this poor lady, all because of some puppy love. But before you get too worried, this is not a common experience. It doesn't happen often, and even in this woman's case, she survived, though narrowly escaping death. Number 5. Skydiving gone wrong. An 80-year-old pensioner was recently left hanging precariously from her skydiving instructor while plummeting towards the ground in a horrifying incident of skydiving gone wrong. Apparently, the 80-year-old woman decided that she didn't want to jump at the very last second and tried clinging to the door. But it was too late. Her harness came loose as she was dragged out of the airplane anyway and left dangling from her instructor as they sped towards the ground at a blistering 125 miles per hour. What's even crazier is that the whole incident was caught on video, and you can see the woman clinging on for dear life while her clothes are being ripped off by the speeding winds. The woman was in extreme danger of slipping out and falling, plummeting to the ground below. If it hadn't been for the instructor's instincts and training, the woman very well may have died. But luckily, the instructor managed to keep a hold of the woman, his parachute was eventually released, and they both landed with no injuries. It was a close call, and basically all because the woman panicked at the last minute. Number 4. Energy drink heart attack. Imagine almost dying because you drank too many energy drinks. That's exactly what happened to yet another unidentified man after guzzling energy drinks and narrowly escaping a deadly heart attack. This guy was only 26 years old when the incident happened. He had no previous health issues. He had nothing wrong with him at all. And yet, he ended up going to the emergency room because of a severe pain in his chest and left arm, which had been going on for about 9 hours. For almost half a day, this guy suffered a heart attack, sweating and sick. And yet, the doctors in Texas could not figure out what was going on. They did some tests, and the man's heart rate, oxygen levels, and blood pressure were all normal. It wasn't until a cardiac catheterization was done that doctors realized one of his arteries was completely blocked. The man then informed the doctors that he typically drank up to 10 cans of energy drinks a day, the equivalent of about 4 liters. You're probably thinking by now that the reason for his suffering should have been pretty obvious, but he didn't even think about it. He needed a team of doctors to tell him that drinking 4 liters of energy drinks a day was a horrible idea. The doctors figured out that the energy drinks probably left a blood clot inside of him that ultimately led to his heart attack, while excess levels of caffeine probably caused the walls of his coronary artery to contract unexpectedly. This guy had to have a stent put inside of his artery to improve his blood flow, and it took 2 days for him to be discharged from the hospital, at which point he had to promise not to drink any more energy drinks. However, it's unknown whether he kept his promise. Number 3. Parkour no more. A Russian YouTuber named Sergei Surikov almost fell to his death in a parkour accident that was easily avoidable. He fell from the 25th floor of a building during a parkour stunt when he missed his footing, and the fall would have killed him except that he miraculously managed to grab hold of some electric cables as he fell. Unfortunately, the electric cables shocked him, but even though he was being shocked, he managed to climb back onto the roof of the building. It was an extremely narrow brush with death that lasted only seconds. If it hadn't been for those random electric cables, this guy's misplaced foot would have left him splattered in a puddle of guts on the ground 25 floors below. The incident was even caught on video, and watching it is enough to make your hands go numb, especially if you're afraid of heights already. Number 2. Attack of the Popcorn. Adam Martin was a 41-year-old firefighter and narrowly escaped dying while eating some popcorn. This is one of the weirder brushes with death, and one of those 1 in a million incidents you only ever hear about on the news. According to the New York Post, Adam needed to have open heart surgery after receiving a fatal blood infection, all because he got a piece of popcorn stuck in his teeth. He had an infection known as endocarditis, which left the inner lining of his heart chambers and valves infected with germs, threatening to shut down his heart. But what's really crazy is that doctors couldn't figure out how he had gotten the infection. Even Adam didn't know. He really had to trace back everything that had happened recently in his life, until he remembered the night he was sharing a bag of popcorn with his wife while watching a movie. He remembered trying to get the piece of popcorn out of his teeth using random objects around the house, from a piece of wire to a rusty old nail. Hey, what about some floss, Adam? It was a long time after this desperate attempt to remove the piece of popcorn that Adam began suffering night sweats, headaches, and constant fatigue. It later turned out that he had the fatal blood infection, and he was extremely lucky that the surgery turned out all right and he lived to eat popcorn another day. Number 1. Cat Scratch Mayhem. A woman recently looked death straight in the eye after almost dying because of a small scratch given to her by a stray cat in her garden. Moira Brady was extremely lucky after the cat scratched her hand, punctured her skin, and a week later, her hand had swelled to the size of a balloon. Moira lost a finger on her left hand throughout the desperate battle to defeat the disease given to her by the cat, and doctors have said she's lucky to be alive. Even still, the infection completely ruined her life. Even after she was healed, she, to this day, is incapable of doing the simplest task, such as taking food out of the oven. This is because the cat scratch gave Moira a deadly condition known as MRSA, which resulted in a bacterial infection. The infection ended up going straight through her body, and she almost lost her whole hand and her life. She had to get skin grafts because the infection was literally rotting the skin off of her body. This is one of the most horrific things that could happen to a person, and all because of a tiny little cat claw. Cats may be cute, but some of them are full of deadly diseases that can turn you into a walking zombie. Thanks for watching. What was your closest brush with death? Tell me about it in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already.